Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into a controversy that really sits right at the intersection of high culture, federal law, and some very aggressive political maneuvering.
It does. We're talking about the recent, and I think it's fair to say, highly contentious changes at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C.
Right. And what's fascinating here is that this isn't just about, a bureaucratic change or a simple difference in programming.
No, not at all. It's about a direct confrontation over institutional control and really the very definition of what a national memorial is supposed to be.
Exactly. We're looking at what happens when a president asserts direct, almost hands-on authority over a cultural space that's, well, traditionally seen as protected by history and federal statute.
That's the core of it. Our source stack today, and we've pulled from a lot of recent AP News and NBC reports, among others, it really gives us this custom-cut view of the fallout.
A view of the decisions, the legal arguments.
The legal arguments claiming it was just flat out illegal, and maybe most compellingly, the dramatic artistic response. This isn't just history we're looking at. It's a blueprint for how power attempts to appropriate public culture in real time.
So our mission for you, the listener, is to really connect these three sort of disparate threads.
You want you to walk away from this understanding the precise sequence of events that led to the name change, the formal constraints, and, the resistance that's rooted in that original 1964 founding law.
And the human element, too. The ethical calculus made by musicians and dancers who chose to cancel their performances, often at great personal cost.
It's a complete snapshot, a true collision of art, law, and politics that I think really defines the current moment.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The action that triggered this whole crisis. The White House announced, I believe it was last week, that President Donald Trump's name would be added to the facility.
And this was done quickly, very visibly, very aggressively.
No subtlety.
None at all. It was done with immediate visible effect, which is, key to its symbolic power. The building's facade was physically changed.
So you could see it from the street.
Oh, absolutely. It now reads, the Donald J. Trump and the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts. And this action wasn't just like a minor administrative tweak. It was explicitly approved by the president's hand-picked board.
And that phrase, hand-picked board, that keeps coming up in the sources.
It's the crucial mechanism. It's how this entire change was executed.
And that political backdrop is just.
Right.
It's absolutely crucial here because the relationship between this administration and the Kennedy Center, it fundamentally shifted.
It really did. For much of his first term, President Trump he'd largely ignored the Kennedy Center. It was sort of treated like any other Washington landmark.
Another building on the tour.
Exactly. But then the sources show this systemic effort to assert deep operational control over the entire institution.
And what does that look like? What are we talking about when we say operational control?
We're talking about institutional capture in its most direct form. It started systematically. First, the administration forced out the previous career-oriented leadership. These were people who had been in arts administration for decades.
Right, the old guard.
The old guard, exactly. Then second, there was a major overhaul of the Board of Trustees. They were replaced with political appointees, with supporters.
And then the final step.
Perhaps the most significant one. The president arranged for himself to head the board, naming himself chairman.
So he's not just influencing the board, he is the board. In a sense.
He's the chairman of the board. So when we talk about a board, which is meant to be a fiduciary trustee for the public interest, being converted into a rubber stamp for the executive branch's political goals, that's the definition of institutional capture.
And there was a stated reason for this, an ideological goal.
There was. The sources describe these changes at the Kennedy Center as part of the president's larger mission to fight woke culture at federal cultural institutions.
So this wasn't just about control for control's sake. It was explicitly about ideology.
It's where the symbolism becomes a tactical move. I mean, you have to ask, why the Kennedy Center?
Because it's a symbol itself.
Precisely. Because attacking a memorial dedicated to a liberal democratic icon and then fundamentally altering its legal designation, it sends an undeniable political message. The name change, the takeover, the stated purpose, they all blend into a single action.
The transformation of a national monument into a political battlefield.
That's it. And that ideological goal, it immediately manifested in programming changes. This wasn't just theoretical. It impacted the center's calendar and its reputation right away.
Beyond just the name on the building.
Oh, yeah. We know there was the immediate removal of highly visible pride events from the center's schedule.
Which is a very clear signal.
It demonstrates that the new leadership wasn't just interested in governance, they were interested in ideological content control.
That is a critical detail, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cultural institutions, especially federal ones, are often seen as like barometers of the national dialogue.
They are. And when programming shifts so aggressively to eliminate events tied to LGBTQ+ communities, it signals that the center's mission has changed from being, an inclusive national stage to one that's aligned with a very specific political and cultural agenda.
And then there was the tradition around the annual Kennedy Center honors.
Another huge break with tradition. This also cemented the shift from, let's say, a neutral patron to an active participant.
So what happened there?
President Trump personally hosted this year's honors. He departed significantly from the typical role of a president who historically serves mostly as a spectator.
Just a respected figurehead.
Right. A figurehead who allows the arts community to celebrate itself. The president is usually there to lend gravitas, not to run the show.
So that transition from spectator to active participant and then to chairman, that's really the final piece of evidence.
It shows the intent to use the center as an operational platform, not just a ceremonial one. It's not just a change in leadership. It's an intended, deep-seated change in ideological direction, using the physical renaming as the ultimate, undeniable symbol of that shift.
And it shows a willingness to break these long-standing sort of apolitical norms to achieve this goal of fighting woke culture in a very public, historically significant location.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move now to the core of the legal debate here. Because the Kennedy Center isn't just any building in Washington. It is governed by a foundational piece of legislation.
It is.
So why is this name change such a deep-seated problem for legal scholars and members of Congress?
Well, the problem goes right back to the origin story of the center itself. It goes back to the national tragedy of 1963.
The assassination of JFK.
Right. His assassination led Congress to act and act quickly the following year in 1964. And they didn't just name a building. This is the key part. They passed a law designating the center as a living memorial to him.
A living memorial. What does that mean legally?
It means the original mandate, the idea that the building itself and its function as a performing arts center is the memorial. That is the legal firewall that scholars argue has now been breached.
So it's not a statue. The memorial is the activity, the art happening inside.
That's the concept, a living, breathing memorial. So Congress wasn't just, naming a facility. They were trying to build a legal fortress around a national trauma and a figure of immense historical significance.
Which speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the original intent to protect the center from exactly this. From political whims.
Precisely. It feels like they almost anticipated potential attempts to politicize the memorial down the line. That's why the language of the 1964 law is surprisingly, almost presciently explicit about preventing this kind of action.
It's not vague.
Not at all. It's remarkably detailed, which means the administration's action wasn't just a political disagreement. It was arguably a straight violation of the statute.
So tell us about those specific legal prohibitions. What does the law actually say that this board decision violated?
Okay, so scholars who have reviewed the original legislation, they argue that the board's decision violates two specific legal prohibitions. These were designed to safeguard the memorial's singularity.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, the law explicitly prohibits the Board of Trustees from making the center a memorial to anyone else. Its sole purpose under the law is to honor John F. Kennedy. Full stop.
Well, that alone should have been the end of the discussion. I mean, if you add Donald J. Trump to the title, you are literally making it a memorial to someone else.
It seems pretty clear-cut. And second, the law contains specific, often overlooked language prohibiting putting another person's name on the building's exterior.
On the facade itself.
On the physical facade. It speaks to the sanctity of the physical building as a dedication. So the act of changing the name on that massive limestone facade to include Donald J. Trump seems to violate both the spirit of the memorial mandate and the explicit letter of the law regarding external signage.
Which raises a critical point about the mechanism of change, right? I saw that the former House historian Ray Smock and his expertise is exactly in this kind of legislative history. He asserts that any change to the center's status or naming would legally require congressional approval.
That's the contention. This was an action taken by the executive branch via an appointed board. It was, in essence, circumventing the legislative body that created and named the memorial in the first place.
Congress made the law.
Congress legislated the name. Therefore, arguably, only Congress can legally change it. The administration's move was, in this view, a challenge to the separation of powers and legislative authority over the public domain.
And the resistance wasn't just rhetorical or academic. It became formal. It went to the courts.
It did. Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, a Democrat from Ohio who also served as an ex officio board member.
So what does that mean, ex officio?
It means she's on the board because of her position in Congress, not because she was a political appointee.
Got it.
So she sued the Trump administration over the renaming. Her lawsuit is highly significant because, as an ex officio member, she occupied this unique legal position to challenge the internal actions of the board.
And she called the renaming a flagrant violation of the rule of law.
That's the quote. It demonstrates that the internal checks and balances designed to protect the institution were activated, even if they were ultimately overruled by the appointed majority on that board.
And then you also have the political weight of the Kennedy family itself weighing in. This isn't just a political spat between parties anymore. It becomes a question of preserving a historical dedication.
A family legacy. Carrie Kennedy, JFK's niece, has publicly vowed to use any legal or political means necessary to remove Trump's name from the building once he leaves office.
So this is a long-term fight.
It signals that the fight is not temporary. It's a custody battle over a family and national legacy that the family intends to maintain for the long term, regardless of who currently occupies the White House.
So if we connect this all to the bigger picture, it really raises an important question, doesn't it? When does presidential influence over a cultural institution, which is, common for any sitting president who appoints board members, when does that cross the line into institutional capture?
That's the question, and I think the deliberate overhaul of the board, the self-appointment as chairman, and the subsequent legal violation claims, they all suggest a transformation of a national cultural asset into a direct political tool.
The core insight here, I think, is that the choice of venue, a memorial to a Democratic icon, is itself a tactical, symbolic attack.
It is. It's an attack in the stated mission to fight woke culture. By installing his name on the facade, the president isn't just honoring himself, he is attempting to symbolically overwrite a historical narrative with his own political brand. The law, in this context, becomes really the only defense against that kind of historical revisionism.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I mean, the political and legal maneuvering set the stage, but the immediate and frankly dramatic response came from the arts community itself.
It really did. They didn't wait for the court cases to play out. They used their moral authority as a weapon. The cancellations began almost instantly.
And sent shockwaves through the center's calendar and, I imagine, its revenue projections.
Oh, for sure. The initial protest acts were often the most poignant because they involved these deep-seated personal connections to the center's history. The most notable early cancellation was from Chuck Red.
Who is he?
He's a veteran jazz drummer and vibraphone player. He's toured with legends, but crucially, he had presided over the Kennedy Center's Holiday Jazz Jam since 2006.
So this wasn't just another gig for him. This is a tradition.
A huge tradition, a holiday tradition dating back over 20 years. He succeeded the legendary bassist William Cater Betts. For an artist, canceling a deep tradition like that, that's a profound statement.
And he pulled the plug immediately.
Instantly. His statement was simple and direct. He said he canceled the performance. When I saw the name change on the Kennedy Center website, and then hours later on the building.
Wow, that immediacy.
It speaks volumes about the symbolic weight of the renaming. For him, in that moment, the center ceased being the memorial he was hired to honor, and it became something else entirely.
And we saw similar moral clarity, didn't we, with the New Year's Eve cancellation?
Yes, from the acclaimed jazz septet known as the Cookers. They canceled 2 performances that were being promoted as an all-star jazz septet.
And their announcement was? It was very philosophical.
It was. It was rooted in the genre itself. They stated that jazz was born from struggle and from a relentless insistence on freedom, freedom of thought, of expression, and of the full human voice.
That framing is a masterstroke of protest, isn't it?
It really is. They are asserting that jazz, a genre born from resistance to oppression, cannot morally be performed in an institution that has, in their view, been politically co-opted and constrained.
They're saying the building itself, because of the name change, violates the principles of the music.
That's exactly what they're saying. The institution, by changing its name for partisan purposes, has violated the very principles that the music they play stands for.
And we know for sure the reason was directly linked to the renaming.
We do. The Cookers drummer, Billy Hart, he confirmed to the New York Times that the name change evidently played a role. And he also noted a very pragmatic concern,
What was that?
that the group was worried about possible reprisals, a fear that, as we'll see later, was unfortunately very well founded given the new leadership's aggressive tactics.
So that's powerful, this idea that political instability translates directly into financial and personal risk for artists.
It does. Which brings us to Kristy Lee. She's a folk singer from Alabama, and she canceled her January 14th show. Her statement really cuts to the heart of the financial and moral calculus involved here.
Especially for working artists who are, operating on thin margins.
Exactly. She acknowledged the very real, deep personal cost involved in her decision. She stated publicly, "I won't lie to you, canceling shows hurts. This is how I keep the lights on."
That vulnerability, that honesty, it makes her next statement all the more impactful.
It does. She immediately followed that up with her core belief. "Losing my integrity would cost me more than any paycheck."
Yeah, one quote.
Yeah.
It encapsulates the entire difficult choice between livelihood and principle.
For her, the damage to her professional soul was a higher currency than the contracted performance fee. And she further clarified that her decision was rooted in concerns for the sender's institutional integrity.
And she used a specific phrase.
She did. She emphasized her belief that publicly funded spaces must remain free from political capture, self-promotion, or ideological pressure.
That phrase, publicly funded spaces, is so critical. It shifts the discussion from a private contractual disagreement to a matter of public trust and governance.
The artist is acting as a citizen, protecting a national asset.
But perhaps the most financially devastating cancellation, at least the one we have a number for, came from Doug Verone and dancers.
A highly respected New York dance company. They were scheduled to perform on April 24th and 25th, and this was supposed to be a celebration of their 40th anniversary. A massive milestone performance.
And Doug Verone, the head of the company, he didn't just express disappointment. He quantified the sacrifice.
He did. He stated they would lose $40,000 by pulling out of those performances.
$40,000. For a nonprofit dance company, that's enormous.
To absorb a $40,000 loss for a principal is an almost existential sacrifice for a company like that.
So let's analyze that number for a moment because it really grounds this abstract concept of integrity.
It does. For a major corporation, $40,000 is a footnote. For a typical mid-sized nonprofit touring dance company, that amount could represent their entire marketing budget for a quarter.
Or the salary of a key administrative staff member.
Or even the cost of developing an entire new production. Verone essentially placed a $40,000 price tag on the integrity of that institution.
His, quote, contrast is truly profound. He called the decision financially devastating, but morally exhilarating.
It's an admission of the crushing reality of the loss, but it's coupled with the intellectual satisfaction of standing by a principle. He further stated, "With the latest act of Donald J. Trump renaming the center after himself, we can no longer permit ourselves nor ask our audiences to step inside this once great institution."
So it's a complete rejection of the newly branded space.
A total rejection. And it's also worth noting, as the sources indicate, that Verone and dancers had originally agreed to appear specifically to honor two of the center's top dance administrators, Jane Raleigh and Alicia Adams.
And what happened to them?
Both of them had already resigned earlier due to the hostile political takeover. So for Verone, the name change wasn't the sole offense. It was the final, undeniable signal of a pattern of institutional deterioration.
He was compounding the loss of trusted, apolitical leadership.
Exactly. And we must also remember this isn't an isolated incident. The protest over the renaming is part of an ongoing trend.
Right. Other major acts had already pulled out since the takeover began,
including Lin-Manuel Miranda's planned production of Hamilton and performances by the artist Issa Rae. The arts community's discomfort has been building for a long time.
And the earlier wave of resignations back in February, following the aggressive board replacement, that really signaled the initial collapse of faith in the center's mission.
It did. That included Pulitzer winner Rhiannon Giddens, world-renowned soprano Renee Fleming, and the singer-songwriter Ben Folds.
So when artists of that stature, Pulitzer winners, international opera stars, when they choose to sever ties, it creates a powerful negative momentum.
The artistic boycott over the renaming wasn't the start of the conflict. It was the inevitable climax to a long-simmering institutional crisis caused by the political overhaul.
But the conflict didn't end with the cancellations. I mean, the institutional defense that followed was immediate, aggressive, and highly politicized.
It was. The new leadership did not shy away from confronting the boycotting artists at all.
This is where we see the new political management really asserting its power and trying to reframe the whole narrative.
And the main spokesperson for this new direction was Richard Grenell. He was the center's interim president and a special envoy for the administration. He dismissed the boycotting artists with extreme, highly polarizing rhetoric.
So what was the essence of his defense? How did he frame it?
He claimed these artists were merely far-left political activists who had been booked by the previous far-left leadership.
So it's a classic political jujitsu move.
It is. Turning the act of protest back onto the protesters by arguing that their cancellations proved the previous management team cared more about political activism and ideology than booking artists who were simply willing to perform for everyone.
And he coined that now famous quote in response to the boycotts that really crystallized the management's view.
Boycotting the arts to show you support the arts is a form of derangement syndrome.
That quote is. It's a very calculated rhetorical device.
It is. It frames the protests not as acts of conscience or integrity, but as irrational political hysteria. It's an attempt to undermine the moral authority of the artist's stand.
It tries to strip them of their ethical rationale and reduce their protest to a symptom of anti-administration bias.
Exactly. But Grenell didn't stop at rhetoric. This is the moment the conflict truly escalated from a political dispute into a direct legal threat against individual artists.
He went after Chuck Red.
He took the aggressive step of directly threatening Chuck Red, the jazz musician who canceled his Christmas Eve concert, with a $1 million lawsuit calling Red's decision a political stunt.
$1 million lawsuit. That seems unprecedented in modern federal cultural administration.
It is. I mean, think about the power imbalance here. You have the interim president of a federally chartered institution threatening a working jazz musician with $1 million legal action simply for refusing to perform.
This elevates the conflict from a mere booking dispute to a highly publicized legal intimidation tactic.
No question.
But what were the potential legal grounds for $1 million? I mean, it seems like a simple breach of contract, which would typically result in recovering lost revenue, not a seven-figure sum.
Well, the sources suggest the $1 million figure was more a punitive rhetorical threat than a realistic estimate of damages. It likely sought to claim damages not just for the lost performance revenue, but also for the alleged reputational harm caused by the stunt.
But regardless of its legal merit, the purpose of such a large threat is crystal clear.
It's to create a chilling effect on any other artist contemplating cancellation. The message is, protest here and we will crush you financially.
So that threat of reprisal, which Billy Hart of the Cookers mentioned as a concern earlier, was thus immediately validated.
Immediately. It dramatically increased the risk for any artist contemplating a moral stand after that.
And the center's position wasn't just about controlling the artists, it was about defining the artist's public duty. Roma Daravi, the spokesperson for the Kennedy Center, she weighed in with a strong counter-narrative.
She did. She asserted that any artist canceling over political differences is selfish, intolerant, and have failed to meet the basic duty of a public artist to perform for all people.
And that creates a fascinating and deep ethical dilemma for you, the listener, to wrestle with.
It really does.
So wait, Daravi argues the artist's duty is to the public who bought the tickets. But doesn't canceling performances actually hurt the patrons the artists claim to be defending? Especially the audience members who don't necessarily share the artist's political views.
And that is the absolute core of the conflict. The new leadership is arguing that the artist's primary moral responsibility is a universal one, to perform for their public regardless of political affiliation.
In this view, abandoning the stage for ideological reasons is selfish.
Right. They are emphasizing the duty to the consumer, to the ticket holder.
But the artists are arguing their duty is to the integrity of the institution and its public trust mandate, which they believe is being fundamentally corrupted by political capture.
Yes. They see themselves as defending the long-term health of the memorial, even if it means sacrificing short-term performance duties to the public.
So this is where we see the clash of duties. Is the basic duty of a public artist to perform for all patrons, no matter what? Or does the artist have a higher ethical responsibility to the integrity of the institution itself?
Particularly when that institution is a federally mandated memorial. The difference in how those two duties are prioritized, it explains the entire conflict. The management focuses on the transactional duty to form the show. The artists focus on the philosophical duty, preserve the trust.
So let's step back and look at the broader implications of what happened here. This is so much bigger than one art center in Washington.
It really is. It's a detailed case study in how cultural institutions become political battlegrounds in the modern era.
The Kennedy Center incident, it really synthesizes this broader ongoing fight over the use and control of publicly funded cultural and historical spaces.
Absolutely. When a political administration decides to weaponize a national monument or a performing arts center to pursue an ideological agenda like fighting woke culture, the resulting conflict shows just how highly valued and contested these spaces are in shaping national identity.
They were not neutral stages.
They are the symbolic high ground.
And what stands out most in this battle are the voices and the actions of the artist, and what we might call the value of sacrificial protest.
Yes. And we have multiple data points confirming the severity of the costs absorbed by these individuals.
We have to revisit those specific numbers to really understand the magnitude. Kristy Lee sacrificing potential paychecks is a significant loss for a folk singer. But Doug Verone and dancers absorbing a calculated $40,000 loss.
A sum that is devastating for a nonprofit arts company. To do that to make an ethical point is extraordinary. It demonstrates that for these artists, the principle of non-capture, of maintaining institutional integrity, was assigned a substantial, quantifiable monetary value.
This action moves the protest from a purely moral stance to a form of, well, quantifiable market rejection. They were just complaining. They were spending their own resources to make their point.
They actively rejected the notion that the artist must be subservient to the political body that controls the venue. And this kind of sacrificial protest is incredibly difficult for the institution to combat.
How so?
Well, if the management's goal is to claim the artists are selfish, that claim falls apart pretty quickly when the public sees a company willingly absorb $40,000 in losses for a principal. The financial sacrifice lends immense weight and credibility to the ethical argument.
And I want to look again at the Cooker's statement about jazz being born from struggle and a relentless insistence on freedom. By pulling out, they transformed their cancellation into an act of artistic freedom itself. How does that work? How does canceling a performance become an act of artistic freedom?
It's a performative rejection. I mean, if the institution, through political capture, is seen as constraining or corrupting the environment in which the artist performed, then the withdrawal, the refusal to perform, becomes the ultimate act of creative insistence on freedom.
So they aren't just performing music about freedom.
They are performing freedom through their absence. It validates their own philosophical statement in a way that simply playing the show, maybe under protest, never could. They use their economic decision as a creative medium.
And the management's response, the $1 million lawsuit threat, that only reinforces the narrative that the new leadership is indeed highly political, punitive, and attempting to silence dissent.
It's the definitive proof point for the artist's claim of institutional capture. It completely validated the fears of Billy Hart and the Cookers. The protest and the reaction became the self-fulfilling prophecy about the center's new political direction.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you navigate the news about cultural conflict? You've seen the legal constraint, that 1964 law explicitly protecting the name and the memorial status.
You've seen the political goal-fighting woke culture through direct board overhaul and naming authority.
And crucially, you've seen the economic cost to the artists, the calculated financial loss used as a measure of moral conviction.
It's a complete snapshot of how culture and power intersect in a high-stakes, real-time controversy. It illustrates that when the boundaries of institutional integrity are breached, the first line of defense often comes from the practitioners themselves, even when they must absorb immense personal and financial burdens to enforce those boundaries.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive into the crisis at the Kennedy Center. To quickly recap the key points, the Trump administration, via a hand-picked board, renamed the facility on its exterior, prompting immediate lawsuits citing flagrant violations of the 1964 law that established the center as a living memorial to John F. Kennedy.
And this unilateral political action led directly to a widespread and costly artistic boycott, with artists like Chuck Red, the Cookers, Kristy Lee, and Doug Verone, and dancers canceling lucrative shows and absorbing major financial losses, explicitly citing integrity concerns over institutional capture and the politicization of a national memorial.
And finally, the center's new leadership, led by Richard Grenell, responded not with attempts at reconciliation or dialogue, but with harsh, aggressive rhetoric, calling the artists far-left activists with derangement syndrome, and escalating the conflict by threatening one musician with a $1 million lawsuit, highlighting the highly punitive and political nature of this new cultural administration.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. If the goal of the Kennedy Center is to be a living memorial to John F. Kennedy, a figure often associated with culture, idealism, and public service, how is that purpose served or potentially corrupted when the institution becomes a flashpoint for current, highly partisan political conflict? Does the very act of protest itself, the willingness of artists to sacrifice major paychecks to stand up for the memorial's integrity against political capture, ultimately draw more attention to and reinforce the enduring legacy of the original honoree than the renaming itself?